And welcome back to another video. And today we are looking at a national poll that we at On Point Politics and SoCal Research conducted for the national environment to see where the race stands as of right now. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. And so we will see that we conducted this poll just yesterday on the 21st at night, and the poll dropped basically on the same evening. Now, we did do a poll on the 17th that showed Donald Trump beating Kamala Harris by 8 points nationally, and that is the same result we get. Donald Trump's at 51%, Kamala Harris drops, each candidate drops about a point in their support from the last poll, even after Joe Biden dropped out of the race. And this was conducted a few hours after the national race stands. And we see that Donald Trump, when third parties in the mix, actually ends up only leading by 6 points. And that's something really interesting. I would have expected Trump to be doing better with third party candidates in the fray. But this does show that it would be a more closer race of 6 points instead of 8 points. And we see that Kamala Harris is losing 18 to 29-year-old voters, losing 30 to 44-year-old voters, is losing 55 to 42-year-old voters. The only group she seems to sort of hold on to is the plus 65 category, but she's not holding on to them by that much compared to what Biden was holding on to them in other surveys. And we see in both scenarios, she actually loses the female vote and loses the male vote by over double digits, essentially. She is losing independent voters by over 15 points, or at least over 10 points in both scenarios. And we see that Donald Trump keeps most of his party compared to Harris. More Democrats defect to Donald Trump and other options than Republicans defect to Harris. So that's going to be a problem too. And especially after the primary where Joe Biden received 14.5 million votes, you're going to have some disenfranchised Democrats that felt like their vote was taken away from them and that they just decided to swap in this other candidate at the last minute. Now, the racial demographics are interesting because Donald Trump is doing extremely well with white voters. He's actually winning them by 20 points when you include third parties and 25 points when you don't include third parties. The other vote is sort of competitive. Now, what I find interesting is that Hispanics are actually breaking to Harris more than Joe Biden, which I find pretty fascinating here. However, this sample was a pretty Democrat sample. It was actually an 11 plus nationwide sample for Democrats. So this sample is pretty skewed to the left despite Trump's large lead. We even see with African American voters in a head-to-head, she wins them by 60 points. And with third parties, she actually only wins them by 49. So that isn't really a good look either. And when we look at Asian voters, Donald Trump is beating her in both scenarios by at least 13 points in each, which is pretty crazy. That may even put Hawaii in a little bit of a state of play there. And we see with no college, Donald Trump leads by over double digits, 15 points with third parties, and without third parties, leads by 16 points. And when we see college educated voters, Joe Biden, or at least Kamala Harris, is only leading by 7 and 8 points respectively. And we see voters, more of an electorate wants, or was at least more likely to vote for Trump after Joe Biden dropping out. About 25% of the electorate, 45% said didn't really make a difference, and about 18% said they were less likely to vote for Trump. But we see the group that is breaking for the more likely category, most of those voters are actually breaking to Donald Trump. And the no difference category is very interesting. About 13% margin there of the electorate that says it is no difference to Joe Biden dropping out in terms of their support of Donald Trump. That group is breaking for Trump by 13%. Decision to leave the presidential race. We actually see the people who approve of that, which tends to be a sort of majority of the electorate, are breaking for Trump by a pretty heavy amount. I mean, by 4 points there. But what I find fascinating is the group that actually disapproves of Joe Biden to drop out of the race actually breaks for Trump very heavily here. And I think there is a reason for that. I think there is a lot of disenfranchised Democrat voters that feel like their vote has been taken away, or a lot of, white working class voters in the Rust Belt that may have kind of stuck with Biden, but now are definitely not going to stick with Harris. And we even see with the third party matchup, the people who approve of Joe Biden to drop out only break for him by 1. Those who disapprove of his decision break for Trump by 17 points. So that is a heavy difference in favor of Donald Trump. We see that the party samples, we see Democrat at 36%, Independents at 26%, Republicans at about 38%. The original sample was a very heavily Democrat sample, but when it's weighed out, we get a little bit more realistic results that would be aligned with previous elections. And we see right here, of course, when we go over here to the side, we see about 27% of Democrats are more likely to support Donald Trump after Joe Biden dropping out of the race, but we see 11% of Republicans are, basically less likely to support Donald Trump. So that is a little bit interesting there as well. I find that pretty fascinating. We see 64% of Democrats are more likely to end up supporting Harris, or at least less likely to vote for Donald Trump after Joe Biden dropping out of the race there. And we see most independents approve of Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the race as of right now. We clearly see that there, 36%, 36%. So across party lines, it is pretty there's a pretty split decision in terms of who they approve of dropping out and who doesn't as of right now. And when we look at the regions, this is the interesting part. Donald Trump in the Midwest actually has his biggest lead over Harris over any group region in the United States. He leads Harris by 15 points or something like that. Or not even 15 points. It's actually more than that. It's probably like 25 points in the Midwest. So he has a huge lead over her in the Midwest. In the Northeast, Harris kind of holds a little bit of an advantage of 51% to 44%. That lead gets kind of cut down in the third party matchup. And we see here with the South, Donald Trump is still up by 8 points. And in the West, Donald Trump actually leads her by 2 points, which is very interesting. So really at the end of the day, Harris did not necessarily get any strength. Now, third parties can kind of influence the race, but Donald Trump winning the national popular vote anywhere by 6 to 7 points would put a huge wrench in a Democrat campaign. And the fact that Harris is going to more than likely lose a lot of rural support in white working class voters, that's actually going to even expand the electoral college bias even more. She would probably have to win the national popular vote by 5 to 6 points to even win the electoral college. And so at this point in time, based off of the demographics that we are looking at, we can say, okay, maybe California's safe because she is performing better with Hispanics than Joe Biden in this national poll, even though my political gut instinct would tell me she wouldn't. But for the sake of the video, we are going to say, okay, we're going to follow the demographics. More than likely, Texas and Florida would actually be in that likely category. Iowa and Ohio would end up going basically safe for Donald Trump in this scenario, and Florida and Texas would be very close to being 15 points. Again, you got to understand, she's winning Hispanics by 22. That's way better than being tied. And so that's going to influence some of the margins in Texas and Florida. Washington, Oregon, Harris doing worse with white voters is actually going to shift these states a little bit closer. So you might see a little bit of a cursed map here. Asian voters breaking for Trump by 15 points. I mean, if you really looked at that, if you look at the demographic margins for that, you see Donald Trump gets 340 electoral votes. And if we were to scroll down to Hawaii, that's a 5-point race in the state. And so just to give you a little bit of an idea of that, that would be really strange. I think it would be a likely margin, possibly even lean. We'll see what happens when we get more polling data out of there. But that would be really interesting. Colorado, I would suspect, would probably be a lean margin in this race, more than likely. You have a lot of college-educated voters, but you also have a lot of white voters that may, in fact, end up splitting to Donald Trump in this scenario as well. States like Arizona, all those McCain suburbanites, I don't think are going to end up splitting to Harris either. I think Donald Trump's going to be able to recover a lot with those, including Georgia and North Carolina, as well as Nevada. We've had polls where Harris is losing Georgia by 10 and 11 points and losing Arizona by 8 and 9. So it's not like she's going to be polling better than Joe Biden. In her Nevada margin, I believe there was a plus 12 poll for Trump out of Nevada. Alaska, I believe, would be safe as well. We would have, Illinois would probably end up being in the likely column. If she's really winning black voters by only 60, that's not going to be a good look. Now, New York may possibly be above 10 points. That may be interesting to check out. I think Rhode Island, Connecticut, those would be likely. Delaware is interesting because this state has a very white population, and if Donald Trump is winning white voters by over 20 points, and without Joe Biden being on the ballot to help him out in the home state, we could actually maybe even put Harris in the link column in Delaware. That's going to be an interesting race to see how that develops. I mean, Sanders and Trump were tied there in 2020 in the same poll where Joe Biden was ahead by 20. So there clearly is a little bit of a difference. And that year, all of the Democrat candidates were actually polling worse than Harris. So that is something interesting to take note in that state as well. New Mexico, in my opinion, this one is weird. It's a little annoying because she is doing potentially C out of the state of New Mexico at this point in time. For Donald Trump in the Rust Belt, I believe it's probably going to end up being a very easy victory for him in those states. I mean, at the end of the day, guys, she has no Rust Belt appeal whatsoever. Her Rust Belt appeal is extremely, extremely, extremely low. We could even see the Rust Belt states vote to the right of the Sun Belt by a pretty decent amount because of this. States like Minnesota will probably go to Trump by 2 to 3. Nebraska second, I don't think would end up going to her at all as well if that white working class support really goes to Donald Trump. A state like Maine, I really don't think would break for Harris either. I think Donald Trump would actually have an easier time winning in states like Maine at large. New Hampshire and New Jersey and Virginia are kind of these pure toss-ups. Now, Donald Trump against Joe Biden with third parties was already leading Joe Biden by 5 points in the state. And we actually had Harris tied in our last matchup. So there is a possibility Donald Trump does end up picking off that state. And New Jersey is interesting because Donald Trump was already leading that despite the fact that it was pre-debate. Even though, yes, it was an internal poll, it was pre-debate, pre-assassination attempt, pre-RNC, and VP pick. So this could be a toss-up, but it honestly could go either way depending on the situation as of right now. And maybe even a state like New Mexico could possibly even be more competitive. Donald Trump is going against another Hillary Clinton-esque type candidate, and that's why you probably will see him do better in the Northeast now compared to what he would have done against Joe Biden, where Biden kind of have a little bit more of a strength there. Meanwhile, Harris may do slightly better in the Sun Belt states as of right now, but based on that national poll, this is what we currently have. Donald Trump getting 342 Electoral College votes to Harris's 196 Electoral College votes. If you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this, and I will see you guys in the next video.